You're listening to episode 67 of the Fed and Fearless podcast. On today's episode, I'm having a frank conversation with Dr. Lindsay Mumma about the state of prenatal and postnatal care in this country. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Laura Schoenfeld. I'm a registered dietitian and coach trained in functional medicine with a passion for helping women just like you ditch perfectionism and use food, fitness, and self-care to fuel your bigger God-given purpose. I believe that it's possible to achieve your biggest life-changing goals without the frustration, obsession, or negative self-talk that so many women subject themselves to every day. All you need are the right tools, the right mindset, and the faith to turn your dreams into reality. I'm here to guide you along the way. The truth is that you are so much more than a body, and I'm on a mission to help you change the way you think and act at a core beliefs level so you can transform your physical, mental, and spiritual health from the inside out. Are you ready to become fed and fearless in your pursuit of a healthy, meaningful life? Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm Laura Schoenfeld. I'm your host as always, and I have a very interesting guest today. She's somebody who lives in Raleigh near me, and she is a wealth of information. She's got a lot of really interesting opinions and ideas, and she's got tons of knowledge about so many different things. It's kind of nuts. Like, I follow her on social media and I see the videos that she posts, and it's just amazing to me how many different things that she has so much knowledge on. So this is someone who I really love interacting with. I love having conversations with and learning from and hearing the different perspectives from. So this is definitely a little bit of an unscripted episode, but it's something that I think you will appreciate and enjoy if you're someone who cares about understanding the truth when it comes to things like medical choices and informed consent, and really all of that related to pre and postnatal care and birth in this country. So it's a little bit of a controversial episode, I must say, but it is something that I think will be really enlightening for you, and hopefully you'll walk away having learned something new. I certainly did, and I'm excited for you to have the opportunity to hear from my friend Lindsay. So Dr. Lindsay Mumma is an entrepreneur, chiropractor, wife, mother, homesteader, friend, daughter, sister, and lots of other things that are hard to put into neat little boxes. She loves helping women from preconception through postpartum. She's passionate about the core and pelvic floor. She believes in living out magic and thinks anything is possible. So like I said, hopefully you can get from that bio that Lindsay's super cool and has a lot of really interesting perspectives on health and birth and just women's health in general. So really excited to have her on the show. And without further ado, here is Dr. Lindsay Mumma. All right, everybody. Well, I am super pumped to have with me on the show today, Dr. Lindsay Mumma. Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I feel like I want to say Lindsay, but then I feel weird. I feel like I should say Dr. Lindsay. What do you want me to call you on this podcast?
Well, first of all, don't ever shit on yourself on my behalf, because I'm a big fan of not shitting on anyone. I go by literally whatever you want to call me. So at my office, for example, on the phone, like when new patients are scheduling, I am Dr. Mumma. And then when you walk in the room, I'm going to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Lindsay Mumma, because that is my name. And I want you to know that my name is Lindsay Mumma. And I don't think that having a doctorate puts me in any sort of hierarchical step above anybody else. So we could just dive right in there, I guess, if you want to. But I have a doctorate. That means that I have education in certain things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I need you to address me as such. Also, you really don't care what it is that I know or what it is that I do or what it is that my education is. You care if I can help you and if I'm a person that you want to spend time with. So whatever you want to call me, I don't really care. I do usually correct people if they say that my last name is Mumma, just because it's Mumma. But other than that, I don't actually care at all what people call me. I think it's weird when people say Miss Lindsay, because both of those things are wrong. Like if we use Miss, then we would typically put in the last name. It's like a preschool teacher thing that a lot of people do, but then they apply it to like all adults. And I'm not a Miss because I am married. So I don't know. That's a weird intro. You can call me whatever you want.
I'll just call you Mumma.
Totally
That's what we'll do. Well, and if anyone's wondering like why Lindsay and I are kind of going off on this tangent, Lindsay lives not too far down the road from me. I used to live a little closer when I lived in Raleigh, and we've had some conversations outside of this recording. So if you guys go to work with her in any way, shape, or form, just know you can call her whatever you want.
Yeah.
So anyway, Lindsay, super excited to have you on the show today. And for those people who don't know you, I would love if you could share your story in a nutshell to make sure we get some expertise thrown in here as well, just about how you got so passionate about women's health, specifically focusing on core and pelvic floor and prenatal and postpartum health.
Yeah. Well, so this is a little helpful in general because I think that a lot of people are like, oh, I want to dive into prenatal and postpartum stuff, or I want to get really well-versed in core and pelvic floor, et cetera, like as it relates to women's health. I actually had no intention of being like a women's health specific practitioner, nor did I have any intention of working with the prenatal and postpartum population. I wanted to be a really great chiropractor who could work with athletes for essentially like optimization. Because I was a lifelong athlete and I really enjoyed that population, and also because it was a challenge because athletes are essentially just really great compensators. So if you see, like you're doing an orthopedic test to determine like how well somebody loads their glutes versus, where they're kind of distributing load. And then you watch Usain Bolt come out of the blocks and you're like, wait a second, his knee just totally went valgus, which all of this stuff doesn't matter to any of your listeners. But essentially what you find is that these really high level athletes aren't necessarily the best of the best. They're just the best at compensating for what they have. And I also think that mindset plays a lot into this as well. But I had no intention of doing prenatal and postpartum work. I just really wanted to be a great kind of sports chiropractor and be really good with rehab. So I'd done a lot of work with dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, which I got exposed to when I was in chiropractic college. And I did it essentially like as much as I possibly could. Like anytime that there was a seminar available, I was going to go to it. And I wanted to learn everything I could about rehab and sports performance. I did some like pain courses, some TMJ courses. I did one extra pregnancy course. That's it. I was like at a course every single weekend. There was only one of those weekends that had a pregnancy course in it. But I learned about diastasis of the rectus abdominis because the dynamic neuromuscular stabilization approach to overall health and then sports optimization is to have core integrity. And so I learned about diastasis as it related to upper motor neuron lesions. So like post-stroke patients who would develop a diastasis, or babies who were born with cerebral palsy who would have a persistent diastasis, because all babies are born with a diastasis. It can remain if there's some motor dysfunction. And so I didn't know, I knew that it related to pregnancy in terms of like an adaptation, but I wasn't really studying that. So in 2012, when my husband and I decided that we were going to get pregnant, I was like, oh, I don't know anything about pregnancy. I need to like start digging and start looking and be kind of like ready for this. And I realized, you know what, I actually do kind of have this sort of core health skill set, which will come into play. Now, I don't know jack about a placenta. I don't know really anything about any of the rest of this stuff. I sort of remember it from like my boards questions, but it wasn't something that I was like really feeling confident in. And so I just kind of dove in. And when I put that intention of like, I am going to learn a lot more about pregnancy and I am going to be prepared. And you know what? I actually do have some skills that are applicable here. It just started attracting that population to me. Like I put it out there and it kind of came back. And then I did get pregnant. And so my abdomen was like a physical magnet for like other pregnant bellies to start coming my way. And so my realization of like, I already had a doctorate and I was getting pregnant on purpose. And I still felt like I didn't have enough information. Like, what about everybody else who's out there who doesn't necessarily know how to sift through research and doesn't have any extra information about like, what the heck am I going to do with my pelvic floor? Am I supposed to do Kegels at every stoplight? Does that seem healthy? Like, what about everybody else who doesn't have kind of all of the background information that I have? when they're trying to get pregnant, or when they just find out that they're pregnant, and then they're already behind the 8 ball because they're like 4 weeks in and they had 4 whole weeks that they missed out on doing research, And so it's like, I need to kind of help here. I feel like there's a little bit of a gap that's missing. And when we planned to get pregnant, I went to a gynecologist, and it drove me freaking crazy because she asked me when I was in the room, she was like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "Why are you asking me this? I wrote it on my intake form. Why did I fill out my paperwork if you weren't going to read it? Like, why couldn't you be bothered to read all of the information that I just gave you? Because that puts together the start of a clinical picture for a physician. So why would you not read my intake form?" And so I wasn't super impressed with the gynecologist, and she had come recommended by a friend, and I was kind of already leaning toward home birth. My husband was not interested in home birth. So then we ended up at the birth center. I was like, you know what? There's so many gaps here in terms of what women realize their choices are, how women are getting pregnant, because most people think that you're fertile for, every day, which obviously that's where birth control comes in, because we're going to control your hormones every single freaking day of the cycle, as opposed to like, oh, there's a small window when fertility can happen. Anyway, so I was like, this is weird that I would be 25 and intentionally getting pregnant, or 26, I guess. Yeah, 26. I don't remember. 25. I was like a quarter of a century, maybe. I was like, it's weird that I got this far and I don't know enough about all these things. I want to help other people kind of find their way through this. So that's how I got here.
Yeah. So that is a really common experience that women either start the preparing for pregnancy journey, or they find out that they're pregnant and now it's like you're just thrown into it, right? It's, even if you weren't planning for it. And I do feel like a lot of the women I've worked with, both pre and during pregnancy, have that similar experience where it's like their doctors aren't really teaching them what they need to know. And like you said, you having your own doctor, like even you going into pregnancy, not really knowing the things that you felt you needed to know to have the healthiest pregnancy and the best recovery possible. I feel like that is really common. And I feel like what's been going on in the last couple of years in our industry is that women like you, or women like us in general, that realize that there is this lack of information and lack of guidance being shared, that we're just kind of like, okay, well, I guess this means I'm the one that needs to do this, because I feel like waiting for conventional healthcare to catch up isn't really, it's not going too fast. So I feel like we kind of have to have this ground level movement where people are deciding that they're going to get expertise in that area and that they're going to learn so that they can then help their patients and their clients.
Well, so 2 things there. The one thing, first of all, some of conventional medicine is moving at literal warp speed. So there's that. I think that is important, that there are some things that we are pushing to the absolute forefront of what our care looks like. Maternal health is not specifically one of them, nor is cyclical health in general, like women's cycles and the health that is part of that and required to maintain that, et cetera. But also, I really wish that none of us had to be experts in this, because if we continued the practice of like mothers and aunts and cousins and sisters accompanying us on this journey of getting pregnant, and then obviously they're not like accompanying on the specific journey of getting pregnant, but like when they're with us for wanting to achieve pregnancy, being pregnant, and then helping us through the birthing process, helping us with nursing. Like if we did that for each other continually, as opposed to like isolating ourselves, which is the number one thing that increases stress and makes it more difficult to have a healthy pregnancy, even preconception time period. Like whenever we're isolated and we don't have that information of the intelligence of like our community, then we have to find experts. And so many women, I think, discover that they can kind of be their own expert, but it takes a lot. It really does. And so to your point, we're kind of like, okay, well, nobody's going to do this for us. We've got to kind of hit the ground running. We've got to make some change, because, with 33%-ish, I mean, kind of varies from area to area. North Carolina has gotten below 30%, which is encouraging, but it's still over double what the recommended cesarean rate is. All major health organizations recommend that the C-section level be 10 to 15% maximum. the farm, which is Ina May Gaskin. If you don't know who that is, you can look up spiritual midwifery or literally just anything about Ina May Gaskin. She's kind of like the grandmother of modern midwifery. They have a 4% transfer rate. So they have like a birth center, which is kind of like a home birth situation where you can go and you can live for like a month around the time when you're birthing. And they only transfer to the hospital 4% of the time. So not all of those transfers are C-sections. Now, granted, they're only taking low risk women into their midst, but for the general population to be at 33% surgical birth, that doesn't really make sense. Surgical birth is meant for emergency situations when surgery is necessary. It's not meant as just like a I guess we'll have this baby via C-section instead of having this baby in the way that was like specifically designed, like the beautiful design of birth, which was stuff that I had either never learned about or kind of forgot about and glazed over. But like the molding of the cranial bone so that baby can come out of the birth canal, which is also known as your vagina. We tend to call it a birth canal during the birth process, but it's your vagina. So a reminder that you get to decide who and what goes into your vagina at all times, including fingers or speculums or anything. But so like the actual pulsations of the contractions as baby is moving down is going to expel the amniotic fluid out of baby's lungs. It's going to cause them to actually ready themselves for entering the world. Like it's such a beautiful process that is super on purpose so that baby comes out ready for life outside the womb. Well, we can step in and intervene and make it easier and set the date and all of that. We're skipping over a lot of beautiful processes that are inherently part of the journey into the world.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if we were planning to go in this direction, but I would love to hear more about this because I think it could be really useful for people to know. And I want to put the asterisk on this that if you had a C-section or you get a C-section in the future, this is 100% shame-free. But I do think that there's a lot of pressure in conventional birthing situations to meet a deadline, right? Like it's like, okay, well, you had your shot to have it naturally. So now we're getting to that timeline that we need to go into surgery, even though, you know, in theory, it wasn't necessary from a health perspective. So all of that said, are there any other benefits to natural birth, either for the baby or the mother, that would, you know, help somebody be encouraged to at least try to make that happen if possible?
Well, so surgical birth is a wonderful thing because it saves lives. When we're doing surgical birth in a situation where it's not saving lives, then we need to recognize that we're doing major abdominal surgery on the same day that you're having a baby. So having a baby is a big freaking deal. It literally changes every single thing from the cellular level of your body all the way to the metaphysical level. Everything about you changes when you have a baby because this whole process is a physiological process that changes. And actually adoptive parents have brain chemistry changes that happen when they decide to adopt, which is pretty freaking awesome. And then that chemistry continues to change through the adoption process, which is kind of amazing because it's not just a biological parenthood thing that changes, but physiologically we adapt to becoming parents. And essentially what we're doing is kind of like passing on this sort of beautiful, wonderful thing where we have self-interest that is helping to keep us alive. And I think that we tend to think of selfishness as being a bad thing, but I think that it's like the way that you kind of come to conclusions, because if you don't know how to make yourself happy, then you can't really apply that to other people. I mean, you can certainly try, and people do, and it usually has terrible results. But if you have this ability to want to keep yourself alive and want to keep your offspring alive, and not just a wantingness, but like a physiology of needing to be able to do that. So like part of that physiology is that a nursing mother will deplete herself of nutrients in order to pass them on to her baby. So we're not specifically worried about like nutrients in mother's breast milk for the baby. We're worried about what happens to the mother, because she will deplete her own self of nutrients and extract them from different parts of her in order to give it to the baby. That way the baby has plenty of nutrients. So a breastfed baby, regardless of mother's diet, actually is going to be doing pretty freaking well. Now we can certainly optimize that, and we can have better things in the, I don't really like to use the word better, but we can have more optimal nutrients in the mother's diet in order to be able to optimize baby's nutrient levels. But we're not super worried about baby because the mother's body will physically give to the baby, whether she wants to or not, right? So there are these like amazing things about our physiology that are going to change. So if we're having abdominal surgery on the same day, imagine if you were like, having your gallbladder removed or something, and you're like 6 weeks of recovery of just like laying in bed and people are taking care of you and all of that. But like, if it's the same day that you have a baby, which is another huge deal, we're just like, oh yeah, it's no big deal. It's just like a different way to have a baby. Like, no, we really need to be caring for these mothers who have given birth and had surgery on the same day, because the recovery for that is so significant. There's recovery from childbirth. I always say that like, if you have this beautiful, serene, peaceful birth where you're like giving birth by a stream and you have a baby squirrel for a doula, and there's like a deer that is your midwife, and like the birds are chirping and it's beautiful and peaceful and wonderful, it's still a traumatic event. All of your tissues are expanding to maximum capacity as you pass a baby from the inside of your body through your body to the outside into the world. Like, it's a huge, and on a tissue level, it is traumatic. So regardless of scenario, we have to recover from childbirth. Well, we do a crap job of that because we're like, oh, do you fit in your old jeans yet? Who freaking cares if you fit in your old jeans? Everyone's wearing leggings anyways. But also, like, your jean size is not really determining how healthy you are. It's not determining whether or not you're at more risk of PMADs, right? So perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. What we need to be doing is taking care of these people in the immediate postpartum period, especially if they've just had surgery. So for the mother, that's really important. For the baby, there's this, what we kind of think is like the thing that begins the cascade of labor, is that a protein in the baby's lungs is fully formed. So baby is now ready to breathe. That protein gets released, sends a signal up to mom's brain, which begins the flow of oxytocin. Oxytocin is the love hormone. It helps with bonding. It actually helps mother and baby to bond together. Oxytocin being released into the room also helps you love your partner more. Also helps you just like love your doula or your doctor, even if they're like a douchebag that day. Like, you have more love being expressed to the people around you, and it actually allows for more physiological connections. Pitocin is the synthetic form of oxytocin. It does the same things as oxytocin without the love. So we can't really synthetically create love. I mean, I guess like in fantasy stories, you have like love potions. That's like as close as you're going to get. But if you have this oxytocin that starts flowing and that begins the contractions, which are going to open up the uterus and then push the baby down, like, this whole process is very much on purpose. We could dope you up with some Pitocin, get those contractions moving, but then you're not having a rest between the contractions the same way that oxytocin does, because oxytocin is causing a contraction, and then you're going to meet it with a little endorphin release and relax and rest in between. Pitocin is like bing, 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 contraction, contraction, contraction. It just keeps going. But additionally, if we just decide when baby's birthday is, we're like, okay, we're inducing on the 24th because it's the day before Christmas, and we, then we're not sure that baby's lungs are fully developed for that. Then, because we haven't had that internal cascade of hormone changes, mom's milk tends to have a little bit tougher time coming in because the colostrum is not specifically ready to release because baby didn't say they were ready to come yet. So we have this kind of disconnect in the whole process. Now, sometimes there are absolute reasons for induction, the same way that sometimes there are absolute reasons for surgery. But when this becomes our routine and this becomes the things that we're doing, which it has been since 1920, we're not improving birth outcomes. And we're still at a really, really embarrassingly high maternal mortality rate in this nation and across the world, really, for industrialized countries. And it's also like there are disparities in different communities. So if you are poorer, you're less likely to have a good birth outcome. Now, if you are a woman of color, you're actually less likely to have a good birth outcome, including death, regardless of your socioeconomic status. So like, there are some things at play here that I think are bigger than any of the things of just simply birth. But I think giving power back to women, giving them information about how their body works and how beautifully this whole thing unfolds, leads to us having not just less surgeries, but less deaths. Leads to us having better birth outcomes. Not just like, oh yeah, mom and baby survived, but like, oh, mom and baby have actually gotten through the entire 4th trimester feeling completely supported. Mom and baby are off to a great start on their nursing relationship. Mom has gone through the entire first postpartum year and felt like she actually mattered the whole time. And her incidence of postpartum depression or anxiety is significantly lower because she felt supported. Like, that's the kind of world where I think we're making change, instead of just like, oh yeah, well, nobody died today. We did everything we could. Like, go on long tangents.
No,
sometimes.
I love it. I didn't know that part about the lung tissue protein formation. How long have they known about that?
That's probably within the last 2-ish years. I don't know. Time's weird now. It's 20.
What decade was it? I feel like 2020 was like a century, right?
Yeah, it's just a very, very interesting and long, short time. But it was somewhere between like 2 and 5 years ago, I'm thinking. It's recent information, and it's the information that we have that tells us best guess, because we like, before that, we really didn't know. It's like, well, the baby comes when the baby is ready. They're sort of like wizards. They're never early. They're never late. They show up exactly when they want to. But that's like the most recent thing that we have that we think is pretty accurate in terms of like when baby shows up. So the lungs are one of the last things that we really need to form. So this goes back to the core health thing, because the diaphragm, which is your actual biggest low back stabilizer. So it's a smooth muscle as opposed to a skeletal muscle, like your glutes and your biceps, your quads, which you have 5 quads, in case you were wondering. Doesn't make sense, but we don't call them quints. Anyhow, those are all skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle is what lines your organs. And so the diaphragm is a smooth muscle that is at the bottom of the lungs. Your diaphragm forms at around 6 weeks in utero, which tells me that your diaphragm is not just for breath, because your lungs don't finish forming until the end of gestation, because you don't need your lungs in utero, because you are getting your oxygenated blood through your umbilical cord as opposed to through breath. So that's one of the reasons why they used to spank babies when they were first born, which is freaking terrible. But a baby would come out and they would cut the cord immediately. So they would want to make sure that baby took a big breath to get a whole bunch of oxygenated blood. So they would smack them. Welcome to the world. I'm going to assault you now. It's like so freaking horrible. They don't do it anymore. What they usually do is like vigorously rub the baby to try and get them to take a big breath in. But you can usually avoid all of that jostling if you simply allow the cord to pulse out its blood.
I don't understand why this stuff isn't just what people do, right? Like, why isn't that just the policy that hospitals have during birth?
So if you want to know why,
there's an answer to that.
An answer to that. Dr. Joseph DeLee is like the father of modern obstetrics. He wrote like the obstetric textbook that sat on every obstetrician's desk. He was the first person to describe birth as a pathological event as opposed to a physiological event. And he published kind of like, this is how we're going to do birth, because we're going to save these women from the horrors that are childbirth, and we're going to protect them from these things. So like, I mean, I think he was a douchebag, but it came from a place of love. Like, he was like, oh, this looks like it's really hard and I want to help. But I mean, I think that we continue to be reminded of this need, because we continue to need to be reminded of this. We have to go through struggle in order to get to the other side. There is no freaking way around it. Every single character in every story needs their dark night of the soul, because without it, they don't get to the end of the story, right? And so we need that work of childbirth, because that work is not pointless. That work is purposeful. Those contractions are physically allowing the uterus to open in a way that's not abrupt, right? So we're going to decrease our risk of uterine abruption simply by allowing the uterus to open in the way that it opens, by these contractions, which are stimulated by the hormone that allows us to love our baby, even though we're like in a whole bunch of freaking pain right now, right? So like, all of this is so purposeful. And when we step in and we're like, I'll help you. So what we're going to do is we're going to give Pitocin, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And then after the baby comes out, we're going to cut the cord, and then we're going to make sure that the baby breathes, because the baby's like purple now. Oh my gosh, they don't have enough oxygen. Okay, well, if you just took like 3 steps back, Joe, hey, maybe we don't cut the cord. Maybe we actually let the baby get the blood that is theirs, because mom and baby have separate blood supply. The placenta is a separate blood supply from mom's blood supply. There is interchanging that happens on a, biochemical level, but we have separate blood supply. The blood that's in the placenta is the baby's blood. If we let the blood of the placenta go to the baby through the umbilical cord, guess what happens to the placenta? It naturally falls off of the wall of the uterus, as opposed to having to yank that sucker out, which isn't super fun and can lead to detachment. So if we just back up and stop intervening and we allow, like, I mean, it's probably harder for the doctor than it is for the mother. Like, yes, she is having a difficult time in labor right now. Is she needing support or is she needing encouragement? Right. And if we're able to be a little bit patient and say, I see you struggling and I'm going to be here for you, instead of I see you struggling and I've got the fix. Right. So that is why we cut umbilical cords. And that is why we give, all of these recommendations that seem to kind of contradict what physiological nature is encouraging us to do. That is why. So there is an answer.
Well, and it's wild to me that we know all this stuff and we're continuing to learn more, right? Like even that lung tissue protein thing in the last 2 to 5 years, whatever range that was. As they're learning this stuff, you would think that there would be an initiative to reevaluate methodology and to say, okay, well, because we know this now we know that this wasn't just like random, which I feel like the more advanced science gets, I feel like the more we realize like this was done on purpose. This wasn't like an evolutionary, like, oh, this is just how it wound up because it evolved that way. It's like, no, this stuff is on purpose. Even the things that don't seem like they have a purpose, when you try to take them out, they mess up, right? Like it's like, the junk DNA that if you remove it, like the animals don't survive or something. So it's one of these things where when we learn this stuff, it's like, okay, well, if that's the way that like the placenta detachment, if that's the way that it works, then like what's the actual benefit of overriding that other than, and I know it's probably going to be money, like that's probably always the answer when we, get to the end of the question, but it's like, if it could reduce surgery, which surgery is obviously a very expensive addition to birth, right? To get surgery. And yeah, maybe it takes an extra day in the hospital or something, like if they're not trying to get a, birth on a deadline. But I don't know if this is even a helpful question because like I said, I feel like I already know the answer, but maybe to add to that question in a more helpful way, we could also ask, what does a modern mother do, or somebody who is planning or is pregnant and wants to maximize the opportunity to let their body do what it was created to do during birth? What would they need to do in the hospital or before the hospital to optimize this opportunity?
So the way that you ask that question is the way that most people ask that question. Like, what about the hospital? So I go to the hospital if I need medical intervention.
Surgery.
Right? I go to the hospital if I need surgery. So, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Like, I'm a chiropractor. People who see a chiropractor, there was a study that was done, for some reason, I know this one, it was done in 2012. In this study, they took workers with low back pain and they did imaging of them to ensure like, okay, these are, similar setup. They sent half of them to a chiropractor. They sent the other half to an orthopedist. And the numbers are just astounding, but so telling. The percentage of people who got surgery who first saw a chiropractor was like 1% to 2%. The numbers of people who had surgery who first saw an orthopedist was like 47%. Now, it's not because orthopedists are doing too much surgery or like the fault of the orthopedist. The orthopedist is like very skilled in surgery. So if you go to an orthopedic surgeon with an issue, their fix is more likely to be surgery than if you go to a chiropractor who cannot do surgery. I don't know anything about doing surgery. You definitely don't want me to do it. You're very unlikely to get surgery. And so if we can have the same outcome of no longer being in pain and having more optimal health without intervening in that way, then I'd love to do that, right? So I think part of what we can start to do is simply recognize that I'm not going to say I'm going to go to my orthopedist. I'm going to say I'm going to go see the orthopedic surgeon, because that reminds my brain of what that person is trained to do. They want to help you. They got into medicine because they want to help people. The way that they help people is primarily with surgery. So if I don't want surgery for my knee that's hurting, then why would I go to the person who does surgery? If I don't want Italian food, then why would I go to the Italian restaurant, right? If I'm really craving tacos, I'm not going to show up at the pasta joint. So if I want to have a physiological birth that unfolds in the way that nature has intended, then it would make sense to me that I would choose a provider who was utilizing physiological principles in their care for me. Midwives do that. Midwives do births in hospital. Midwives do births in birth center. Midwives do births at home. But I don't necessarily have to go to the hospital for a birth because I don't necessarily want to be in a hospital for birth. My people are awake from nap time. So if we start to recognize, right? So instead of saying my OBGYN or my obstetrician or my OB or whatever, if I say my birth surgeon, that might be helpful when recognizing who do I want to set my appointment with? Because if I need surgery, then I want a very skilled birth surgeon. But if I don't want or need surgery, then I don't want to go see the surgeon because I want physiological birth. If I want physiological birth, then I want to go see somebody who practices physiological deliveries. So the whole framework of midwifery care is education. I actually did a home visit earlier for a woman who gave birth earlier this morning. And she had her first cervical check from her midwife when she was 8 centimeters dilated. Throughout her entire 40 weeks of pregnancy, her midwife never checked her vagina or her cervix because she was like, well, this is clearly working because you're pregnant, still working because you're still pregnant. Okay, things are, progressing along. And we were kind of talking about it. I think that the cervical check was more for the mom than it was for the midwife. It wasn't for the midwife to get information. It was because the mom needed to hear that she was doing really well and making good progress. A way that I can give you objective information is to tell you, fairly subjective because we're just doing fingertips to determine the opening. But okay, you're 8 centimeters. You only have to get to 10. You've done a lot of work thus far and you're really close, right? So it's the first cervical exam that her provider did because she just trusted in the physiological process of how her body was working. So my recommendation to short answer to your question that you asked 10 minutes ago before I went on a tangent, what is to find a provider who listens to you. Because so I knew for sure there's no way that this gynecologist who didn't read what my intake form said was ever going to read a birth plan. Right? If I wrote out a 3-page kind of whole deal of what I want my perfect birth to be, and this is exactly how I'd like it to go, she's not going to read it. She didn't even read the occupation line on my intake form, right? So I want to find a provider who listens to me. I want to find a provider that I'm comfortable with. I want to find a provider who, I can ask for your records. How many cesareans have you done this year? How many episiotomies have you cut this year? Can you tell me the circumstances under which you would want to induce? Can you tell the circumstances under which you would allow a woman to progress to 42 weeks pregnant without any intervention? Those are the types of questions I would like to know. And if you're not answering in a way that feels comfortable to me, then I would like to shop around because I am paying you as my healthcare provider and I'd like to find somebody who's going to support me. Because that's a thing where I think, kind of back to the beginning of our conversation, we put doctors on this pedestal of well, this is the person and they know. Okay, well, get a second opinion. If you don't like that one, try a third one. Maybe they're all going to give you the same information and maybe that's just what you have to deal with. But what if you find something that works better for you? Wouldn't you rather do that? It's your money. Even if it's your insurance, you're still paying for your insurance. You can find somebody who's actually going to support you and the things that you want as opposed to, whatever's going to make their day go a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you would think that with birth, from the insurance perspective, that having a unsurgically intervened birth, that would actually be less cost. Maybe I'm wrong, but you would think it would be a lower cost way to give birth than a situation where there's surgery.
Yeah. So if you have a home birth or a birth center birth, you're looking somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000-ish, in this area. If you have a hospital birth, you're looking at about $10,000. If you have a C-section, it's about $30,000. Now, oftentimes you're going to have insurance that covers decent portions of all of that, including home birth. A lot of insurances will actually cover the costs of prenatal care with a home birth provider. Some of them don't. It's out of network provider coverage that they're going to get, but there are options. And how much are you going to pay for your $30,000 C-section that your insurance isn't going to cover? Who knows, right? And then in those scenarios, you oftentimes will see additional charges. There was this thing that went viral where a woman had asked for skin to skin time with her baby immediately after her C-section. And there was an extra charge on her hospital bill for that. Now, it was kind of explained that the charge was because they needed to have an extra nurse in the room in order for that to happen. But it struck a nerve within the kind of like birthing community of like, why would you charge a woman to let her baby be on her chest immediately after birth? Because there's so much physiological benefit to skin contact.
Mm-hmm. You would think that that would be, again, part of policy, that that's what they do, as opposed to like an extra thing that you have to request and then pay extra for.
Right. But it was a thing that she requested and it was a thing that she paid extra for. So that was questionable.
Well, and I feel like it's funny. I had these questions prepared for our discussion today, and I definitely asked like one of them. So
I'm going to go rogue every time. You just don't even know.
No, I love it. But it's something, I think it's so interesting because I feel like, and this is something I've learned a little bit about, but because I've not had my own children, it's not something I've had to get super deeply educated on. So if somebody is wanting that level of support, and I know that in North Carolina, well, I feel like I've heard in North Carolina, home birth with a midwife is not technically legal. Is that correct?
Not true.
Oh, really?
So home birth with a midwife is legal if she or he, there could be male midwives.
A mid-husband?
Mid-husbands. There are only currently, I believe, 5 legal home birth midwives in the state of North Carolina. There may be 6 now. I'm trying to remember because one of them retired. Anyway, they have to be a certified nurse midwife. So, which is really, really interesting because there are CNMs, which is a certified nurse midwife, and CPMs. CPMs are certified professional midwives, and they learn through schooling and then apprenticeship. Certified nurse midwives go to nursing school and then go on to midwifery school. And so it's a different kind of approach, really, because they're nurses and then they're midwives, whereas CPMs are kind of, they're doing midwifery kind of the whole time. The CNMs also have to have a practicing OB sign off on what they're doing. So they have to have kind of a backup physician who is saying that, yes, I approve the things that she is doing in her work, et cetera. So there are not a lot of options in general because, their schedule fills up quickly, but the number of people who are birthing outside of a hospital is still so much smaller than the number of people birthing inside of a hospital.
I feel like, and that's something, again, you would think I would have known this, and I don't know who I was talking to, but I had heard that having, like, if a midwife has a license, but they're not, I guess, the nurse midwife, that they could be in a lot of legal trouble if they were to do a home birth. So if they do not have an overseeing physician, then they can't do that. And if they are a licensed professional midwife, so a CPM, then they I mean, like if you're attending a home birth as a practitioner and you're not a CNM who has physician backup, you can go to jail. But if you have a birth at home accidentally, everybody's cool, right? It's like totally fine as long as it wasn't planned.
Yes. And so I mean, like, I know several people who like, holy crap, my water just broke. We better go to the, never mind, here's the baby. Like very like kind of rapid situation of like, oh, never mind, we're having a baby at home. And my one friend, that she had a baby in her bathroom and like she had her shoes on. That's just the best part of the story, is that her shoes are on. She like had put her shoes on and then she had a baby and because she was getting ready to go to the hospital, but then, it just kind of like progressed and she's just like bending over her sink and she's like, nope, we're not going anywhere. But they were like, oh, they wanted to send the ambulance to come and get her. She was like, you don't really need to, like, we're kind of fine. Somebody could cut the cord, I guess. So like, it's just such a weird situation because it's not an emergency. But then because it happened and nobody got to see it, it becomes like, oh my God, what happened? This is an emergency, and it's not, I mean, birth happens all the time. And like the normalcy of birth is a beautiful thing, but that doesn't take away from like the sacredness of birth. You can go either way on that, I guess. Like it's super normal, but it's also super beautiful. I mean, it's like a sunset, it happens every day, but it's still freaking gorgeous.
I love it. Well, I feel like I could talk to you for another hour, of course. So Unfortunately, I do have to wrap up our conversation, but we'll probably need to have you come on for a part 2 to talk more about all your knowledge, because I know you have so much to share. If somebody wanted to have you as part of their healthcare team going through the process of preparing for birth, giving birth, all of that, because I think it's really awesome to have someone who they can ask these questions to and get really good answers. Where can people find you?
So I own Triangle Chiropractic and Rehabilitation Center, and that is a clinic here in North Raleigh, and you can go to trianglecrc.com. If we're still continuing to use social media, we haven't completely opted out of it, then you can find me at Triangle CRC. And then also my kind of personal, but I'm pretty cautious about all of the personal things that I share. So it is my personal account, but it's really just a lot of me ranting and like not too much of my kids, is at Lindsay Mumma. So I can be found there, but trianglecrc.com has all of our contact info that you can find, and you can hang out with me in whatever way you want.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I feel like there was a totally different conversation that I was planning for, but I love the spontaneity. So I'll have to invite you on for part 2 to cover some of those questions I didn't get to ask you, but I just love having that conversation about preparing for birth in a way that allows you to have the medical freedom that you want to have, but also make informed decisions. So
yeah, well, any chance to talk to you, Laura, I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you so much to Dr. Lindsay Mumma for coming on the show today, and we'll see you here next week on the Fed and Fearless podcast. Take care, everybody. Hey there, Laura here again. Thank you so much for listening to the Fed and Fearless podcast. Your time is your most precious resource, and I'm so grateful that you choose to spend some of it with me. Now, if you're enjoying the podcast and want to continue supporting my work on this show, I would very much appreciate it if you would leave a review on iTunes. By leaving a 5-star review, you'll help others find the show and help me spread my message to a larger audience. You can go to fedandfearless.com/review to find a button that'll take you right to iTunes to leave your review. And I have a special gift for you as a thank you for helping me share the podcast. Once you leave your review, send a screenshot of the review to hello@lauraschoenfeldrd.com. Or you can DM it to me on Instagram at lauraschoenfeldrd. Once you do, I'll share a free copy of my Overcoming Undereating ebook. Then share a favorite podcast episode in your Instagram stories and tag me at lauraschoenfeldrd. And I'll also give you a free copy of my 14-day calorie challenge recipe guide. Together, these bonuses are worth $44 and will help you become Fed and Fearless. And you'll get them absolutely free for just helping me grow the podcast. Again, thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you here next week for the latest episode.